Okay, welcome World History. We are going to begin our study of the Russian Revolution and totalitarianism. Okay, the Russian Revolution will be what leads Russia to a government called totalitarianism. Okay, and totalitarianism is really going to be the big focus of the unit. Okay, but we have to take a step back and understand what opened up the opportunity for this new kind of government. It had never been done before. It was a communist totalitarian government. And so the question is, how did this happen? And it happened because of the Russian Revolution. So we're going to take a step back and look at how Russia had been governed for 1,000 years, and it was by a czar. This word right here, CZAR or TSAR, czar. The T and the C are silent. Simply means king or emperor in Russian. It is from the word Caesar, kind of like in Germany we had the word Kaiser to mean king. Okay, and so these czars and czarinas, the female version, had been running Russia for hundreds, if not 1,000 years. Now, this particular family that we're looking at is the Romanov family. You'll see that in the video that I've posted, you'll be watching. The Romanov family, this is their crest, had been ruling Russia for some 300 years. Russia at this time was a huge empire. It encompassed 1/6 of the world. Okay, Russia controlled 1/6 of the world. And as you know, from the fall of the Roman Empire and the fall of the Ottoman Empire, it's very difficult to rule an empire that big. And how did they do it? Well, they did it by ruling with an iron fist. Ruling with an iron fist is a saying that you use for someone that is very cruel and oppressive. Okay, so to control that much land, they had to be um, very dominant, very controlling. The people of Russia subsequently were very unhappy and wanted change. Okay, some of obviously here, Alexander II, one of the czars, was assassinated because the people weren't happy. Alexander III comes in and he kind of lays the smack down because his father had been assassinated. These czars that ruled with an iron fist used autocracy. That means they had total power, one ruler, so it's not democratic. Um, they used orthodoxy. It was the Russian Orthodox Church, nothing. In other words, there was no freedom of religion. Russian Orthodox Church only. Okay, no freedom of religion. And then that new concept we discovered, nationalism, was very important. Everything was to be Russian. The language, the culture, the church, etc. AON, autocracy, orthodoxy, nationalism. Other things that they used Other things that they used were pogroms, which was organized violence against Jews. They used censorship to control information. We'll talk more about that later. They used a secret police to monitor individuals, teachers, students, people who are going to cause problems. And then the last thing they used was exile, where they would send you off to Siberia, in a prison camp, or exile you completely to another country. Okay? Ruling with an iron fist. People very unhappy. Okay. And so, a couple hundred years of Romanov rule brings us up to Tsar Nicholas II. He's our guy. Okay. Nicholas II will be the last Tsar of Russia. He takes over in 1894. He marries Tsarina Alexandra. They have 5 children. If you are familiar with the Disney movie Anastasia, okay, Anastasia was their youngest daughter, and it came from rumors, the movie plot. All right. I had mentioned in the last chapter that Russia had been very, very far back industrially. The Industrial Revolution skipped over Russia. So they were about 100 to 150 years behind. As you can see, here they are finally completing the Trans-Siberian Railway. That means all the way across Siberia. You know, the U.S. had a transcontinental railroad by the early 1860s, so they are quite a ways behind. As Russia starts to industrialize, they themselves have the same problems that other large countries had with industrialization. They had poor working conditions, low wages, child labor, etc. There's Tsar Nicholas II with his cousin George V. They look like twins. Don't forget, Kaiser Wilhelm II was also their cousin. We're going to skip over that. Okay, and then here is my synopsis. We've already noticed that the people were unhappy for quite a few reasons, problems associated with industrialization, their own industrial revolution. They were unhappy by being ruled by an iron fist. Okay, and so what you see is a lot of unhappiness by the people. And what I'm going to do now is summarize the 4 big events that led to the Russian Revolution. Tsar Nicholas II was just kind of in the wrong place at the wrong time on a lot of these, unfortunately for him. Okay, the first one is going to be the Russo-Japanese War, 1904-1905. The fact that Russia had not industrialized or was industrializing late, they got whooped by Japan. And you notice Japan is this little small country here. They were fighting over this region, but Japan beat them soundly. And so that was humiliating for the Russian people. So, who do they blame? Well, they blame the Tsar for that loss. The second large event that makes the people very unhappy is this event called Bloody Sunday. 200,000 workers, their families were marching on the Winter Palace for better working conditions. The troops come out. Long story short, one thing leads to another, and the troops here fire on the civilians. Okay, several hundred were killed, over 1,000 were wounded. And, who do you blame? Who do they look to? They look and they blame the Tsar. Coincidentally, the Tsar wasn't even there that day. And then, of course, we have World War I breakout in 1914. And again, Russia had not industrialized fully, so they take the brunt of the damage during World War I. Staggering losses, some 4 million soldiers killed, wounded, or taken prisoner in the first year alone. Again, people unhappy. Whose leadership? It goes to the Tsar, is being blamed. And then the final reason would be his wife herself. Tsarina Alexandra, whom he and her were madly in love with one another. It was an arranged marriage, and she was a German princess. And who was Russia fighting in World War I? It was Russia fighting Germany. And so there were rumors, not true, but there were rumors that she was a German spy, etc., etc. Okay, so those had already been there. And then you'll see the entrance of Rasputin, who also undermines the confidence in the Tsar. You'll see him in the video. Okay, but he has considerable influence over the Tsarina, so there's a lot of rumors about them as well. All of this making the Tsar look bad, undermining his authority, making him look as though he's an unfit ruler. Okay? You're gonna do that cartoon later. So all the while these people are unhappy, there's a bunch of people looking to make changes. And we said that change in this class would be revolution. Okay? And this guy is a big Lenin. Okay? This is where the Bolsheviks come in. The Bolsheviks are a political party, and they were led by this man, Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov. He goes by Lenin. Why? Because he had been a revolutionary for years. He'd already been exiled by the Tsar. He got kicked out. The Germans, the Germans will actually help smuggle him back in because Germany wanted him to stir up problems, and he does. So Lenin comes in and leads the Lenin leads the Bolsheviks, and the revolution goes in stages. Okay, revolution number one is when the Tsar abdicates. Basically, he gives up his throne. Um, the big question is then who would take over. And so we had this power struggle between the provisional government led by Alexander Kerensky. This was going to be a democratic form of government. And then, of course, the Bolsheviks, led by Lenin, were going to run an experiment with communism based on the writings of Karl Marx. Okay? Lenin comes back to Russia crying, screaming at the top of his lungs, and promising peace, land, and bread. Peace meaning they'll get out of World War I, which is devastating Russia. Bread means that their bellies would be full because they are starving because of the war effort, because they hadn't industrialized. And then land, because 90% Russians at this time were still peasants. They did not own their own land. So, to the majority of Russians, Lenin's message sounded really, really good. Okay, so revolution number one is the abdication of the Tsar. The Tsar says, I can't lead you anymore, somebody else take over. Revolution number two is when the Bolsheviks take over the government. And then what this leads to is number one, the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. This is 1917. Remember we said that the Russians exited, they left World War I early, and this is the treaty. Okay? Now, when they tapped out to Germany, they lost a big chunk of land here in the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. They will want it back. Okay? Just keep an eye on that for the future. So when the Bolsheviks take over, it leads to number one, getting out of the war, and number two, it leads to a civil war back at home. It will be the Reds versus the Whites. The Reds are communists, and the Whites are democratic. Okay? This man, Leon Trotsky, leads the Red Army. Him and Lenin are buddies. The big thing to know here is that the Civil War lasted 3 years and killed 14 million people, okay, in the struggle itself and the famine that followed. So Russia was devastated because of World War I and then a 3-year civil war. In the end, the Bolsheviks win. Lenin is in power, but he doesn't live that long. And that will make a big question here is, who takes over? Lenin had just taken power, so now who takes over? And this is how we end up with this totalitarian style of government, which I will cover in the next video, okay? Bolsheviks win. Russia is renamed the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or the USSR, or the Soviet Union, okay? Bolsheviks changed their name to Communist Party to reflect the teachings of Karl Marx. All right, so that is Tsar to Revolution, and then I'll pick up with totalitarianism and the Big Five in the next edition. Thank you.